There's a moment most people never notice, and it quietly defines the rest of their lives. It's not when they choose a career. It's not when they get their first paycheck. It's not even when they decide to get serious about money. It's earlier than that. It's the moment they decide, without realizing it, that they will think like someone who survives instead of someone who builds. And once that decision is made, everything else becomes predictable. Because you don't become rich by accident, but you also don't stay average by accident. You follow a script. And the disturbing part is, most people never wrote their own. They inherited it. Think about this carefully. Why is it that two people can hear the same advice, read the same book, pray the same prayers, and still end up in completely different financial realities? It's not effort, it's not intelligence, it's not even opportunity. It's something much quieter and far more dangerous. It's the way they think asterisk asterisk before asterisk asterisk they act. Because one person hears an opportunity and thinks, how much can I earn from this? The other hears the same thing and thinks, how can this multiply without me? And that single difference, invisible at first, becomes a gap that widens for decades. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people don't just think small. They defend that thinking. They call it realism. They call it responsibility. They call it being wise with money. But if that were true, why do the same patterns keep repeating? Working harder, but never getting ahead. Earning more, but feeling no freedom. Saving money, but still living in quiet anxiety. At some point, you have to ask a question most people avoid. What if the problem isn't how much you earn, but the way you see money itself? What if you've been trained not to build wealth, but to maintain survival? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The system rewards effort, but limits ownership. It encourages activity, but not leverage. It teaches discipline, but not multiplication. And so you end up doing everything right, inside a structure that was never designed to make you free. Now pause for a second. Be honest. Have you ever felt like no matter how much you improve, you're still operating inside invisible boundaries? Like there's a ceiling you can't quite break through, even though you're doing more than most people. That feeling isn't random. It's the result of a mindset you didn't consciously choose, but have been operating under your entire life. And this is exactly what Solomon understood, long before modern economics ever existed. He saw something most people still don't see today, that wealth is not built from the outside in, but from the inside out. That if your thinking is structured around survival, no strategy will save you. And if your thinking is structured around multiplication, almost any opportunity can become wealth. But here's the part that changes everything. This wasn't just Solomon's insight, because centuries later, Jesus would say something that sounds spiritual on the surface, but is deeply economic at its core. Something most people hear, but almost no one applies. And once you understand what he actually meant, you realize this was never about money alone. It was about alignment, about order, about what you place first, before anything else. Because the moment you shift that, everything else begins to rearrange itself. But almost no one makes that shift, not because it's hard, but because it requires something most people avoid at all costs, admitting that the way they've been thinking might be the very thing keeping them stuck. And if you're starting to feel that tension right now, good, because that means something is already breaking. What keeps most people stuck is not lack of effort. It's invisible conditioning. You don't decide how to think about money as an adult. You absorb it long before you ever earn your first dollar. Quiet signals, small phrases, repeated patterns. Be careful. Don't risk too much. Money is hard. Just be grateful you have stability. None of these sound wrong. That's why they're dangerous, because they don't block action. They shape perception. And perception decides everything. You don't pursue what you don't believe is possible. You don't build what you secretly think will fail. You don't multiply what you're afraid to lose. So even when an opportunity appears, your mind doesn't evaluate it objectively. It filters it through fear, through scarcity, through past experiences that had nothing to do with the present moment. And here's the mechanism most people never notice. Your brain is not designed to make you rich. It's designed to keep you safe. That means every time you face something unfamiliar, something uncertain, something that could change your life, your first instinct is not expansion, it's protection. Stay where you are, don't risk it, don't lose what you already have. And that's where the trap closes. Because wealth is built in uncertainty, but your mind is wired to avoid it. So you end up doing what feels right. And what feels right keeps you exactly where you are. Now look at how subtle this is. You say you want financial freedom, but you prioritize stability over ownership. You say you want abundance, but you avoid decisions that don't have guaranteed outcomes. You say you want to build something bigger, but you keep choosing paths where your income depends entirely on your time. That's not contradiction, that's conditioning. And it creates a loop that's almost impossible to break without awareness. You work gives you earn, gives you spend, gives you repeat. You improve gives, but inside the same structure. No matter how much you grow, the ceiling stays the same, because the system is internal. And here's the hardest truth to accept. Most people don't fail financially because they make bad decisions. They fail because they make *** predictable decisions, ***, based on a mindset that was never designed for wealth. That's why Solomon didn't start with strategy. He started with thinking, because once the mind is aligned, decisions change automatically. Risk becomes calculated instead of avoided. Money becomes a tool instead of a goal. Time becomes leverage instead of something to sell. And this is where everything begins to shift. Not when you learn more, but when you start seeing your own patterns clearly enough that you can't keep repeating them unconsciously. Because once you see it, really see it, you start noticing something uncomfortable. The way you think about money is showing up in your daily life. Right now, you've probably never said it out loud, but it shows up in the small decisions you make every single day. It's there when your money comes in, and somehow disappears faster than you expected. Not because you're careless, but because everything already has a place to go. Bills, commitments, things you said yes to months ago, that you can't easily walk away from now. And deep down there's that quiet thought, I'm doing everything right, so why does it still feel like I'm behind? Or maybe it shows up differently for you. You see opportunities, ideas, things that could change your situation, but something inside you hesitates. You overthink it, you wait. You tell yourself, I need to be more prepared first, and then someone else moves, not necessarily smarter than you, not more talented than you, just faster, and you're left with that familiar feeling again. I knew I should have done something, but you didn't, not because you're lazy, because something inside you held you back. Or maybe it's even quieter than that. You don't even look for opportunities anymore. You've trained yourself to focus on what's in front of you. The next paycheck, the next expense, the next month. You've become efficient at maintaining your life, but disconnected from building a different one. And the most dangerous part? It feels normal. You wake up, you work, you handle responsibilities. You get through the week, and on the surface, everything looks fine. But underneath, there's a tension you can't quite explain. Like you're capable of more, but stuck repeating something smaller. Like you're moving, but not actually progressing. And every now and then, it hits you, maybe late at night. Maybe when you see someone your age living differently. Maybe when an unexpected expense shows up and shakes everything that thought this can't be it. Not out of frustration, but out of awareness. Because something in you recognizes the pattern. The same cycle, the same decisions, the same outcomes, and if nothing changes, the same future. Now here's where it becomes uncomfortable, because if you're honest, it's not that you didn't have chances, it's that you didn't see them as chances. Or you saw them but didn't move, or you moved, but only in ways that felt safe, and safe decisions rarely lead to different results, so you adjust your expectations. You tell yourself this is just how things are, this is reality, this is what responsible people do. But deep down, there's a part of you that doesn't fully agree, a part that keeps questioning, a part that feels slightly out of place inside the life you've built. And that feeling is not random. It's not dissatisfaction, it's recognition. Because something in you already knows. You're not stuck because of your circumstances. You're stuck because of a pattern you've been repeating, without realizing it. And now that you're starting to see it, the question changes. It's no longer, why isn't this working? It becomes, what exactly have I been doing that keeps creating the same result? And this is where most people expect a motivational answer. Work harder, save more, be more disciplined. But that's not where this shifts, because long before modern finance existed, before banks, before salaries, before economic theory, this pattern had already been observed and warned about, not as advice, as law. There's a line that most people read, but almost no one actually sees. Give portions to 7, yes to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. At first it sounds like generosity, but it's not. It's structure. It's telling you something very precise. If everything you have is tied to one outcome, you are already exposed. And exposure is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. That's not spiritual poetry. That's risk management, written thousands of years ago. And then there's another line. The plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, effort leads to profit. It doesn't say, intention leads to profit. It says plans, structure, deliberate positioning. Because moving fast without structure is not ambition, it's vulnerability. Now take this one step deeper. There's a story about 3 people who were given resources. One multiplied, another multiplied, and one did nothing, not because he was incapable, because he was afraid. He protected what he had instead of growing it, and that decision was treated as failure. Not loss, failure. Which means this: playing safe is not neutral. It's a choice with consequences. And this is where everything connects. Because when you hold on to money out of fear, you don't preserve it, you limit it. When you avoid movement to feel secure, you don't protect your future. You shrink it, and when you wait for certainty before acting, you miss the very thing that creates growth. That's why there's another principle most people misunderstand. No one can serve 2 masters. Most people hear that and think it's about morality. But look closer. It's about alignment. You can't build something meaningful while being mentally dependent on something that controls you. Because dependence changes how you decide. It makes you choose safety over opportunity, short-term relief over long-term structure, and without realizing it, you start organizing your life around maintaining stability instead of creating freedom. So when Solomon says to think first, to plan, to structure, and when Jesus points to what you serve first, they're not speaking about religion in isolation. They're pointing to the same invisible principle. What you prioritize internally will shape everything you build externally, and if that internal order is wrong, no amount of effort on the outside will fix it. That's why this isn't about knowing more. It's about recognizing that the pattern you've been living was already described, long before you ever stepped into it. Now bring this out of theory, and look at how it actually plays out. It's the first day of the month. Your income lands. For a moment, there's relief, a quiet sense of control. This time, I'm going to handle it better. But then it starts. Rent, bills, subscriptions you barely think about anymore. Things you committed to weeks ago, maybe months. And before you even make a conscious decision, the money already has a destination. Not because you chose it today, but because you locked those choices in earlier. And by the time you look at what's left, you don't feel powerful. You feel managed. Like your money didn't come to you, it just passed through you. Now fast forward, you're scrolling or talking to someone, and an opportunity shows up. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real. Something that could grow, something that could shift things. And for a second, you feel it, that spark. That could actually work. But then something else kicks in. Now's not the right time. I need more security first. What if it doesn't work? So you wait, you analyze, you delay, and slowly, that opportunity fades. Not dramatically, just quietly, into someone else's hands. Days later, maybe weeks, you see it again. Someone else did it, not better than you, not more prepared than you, just they moved. And that feeling comes back. Not regret exactly, but recognition. I saw that. And you did. But seeing isn't the same as acting. Now zoom out even further. Look at your last few years. Different months, different situations, but somehow the same pattern. Money comes in, gives disappears, gives pressure returns. Opportunities appear, gives hesitation, gives missed. Plans are made, gives life happens, gives reset. Over and over and over again. Not because you're careless, because the structure hasn't changed. You've been improving inside the same system, working harder, trying to be smarter, being more disciplined, but still operating within a pattern that was never designed to create expansion. And then there's the quieter moments, when something unexpected happens, a car repair, a bill you didn't plan for, a sudden shift, and everything tightens, not just financially, mentally, because in that moment you realize there's no margin, no space to move, no flexibility, just reaction, and that's when it hits hardest, because it's not about the expense, it's about the lack of control. Now here's the uncomfortable part. None of this is new to you. You've felt it before, you've noticed it. Maybe not in these exact words, but in those moments where something felt off, where you thought there has to be another way to do this, but then life continues and the pattern resets again. Until now. Because when you start seeing these scenes clearly, not as random events, but as a repeated structure, something shifts. You stop blaming circumstances, and you start questioning the system you've been operating in, and once that question becomes real, you can't go back to ignoring it. And if you stay with that question long enough, it starts to get personal. Because at some point it's no longer about the system out there. It's about the choices you made inside it, the moments you knew, and still didn't move. The times you felt something was off, but ignored it. The decisions that felt safe in the moment, but slowly built a life that feels smaller than what you're capable of. And that's not easy to admit. Because it means accepting something most people spend years avoiding. You weren't just reacting to life. You were participating in a pattern that kept you there. Not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. And when that realization lands, it doesn't feel empowering at first, it feels heavy. Because now it's not just things didn't work out, it's I saw more for myself, and still stayed where I was. There are moments you can probably remember right now. A decision you delayed, an opportunity you dismissed too quickly, a risk you talked yourself out of, not because it was wrong, but because it was uncomfortable. And maybe you replaced it with something that felt productive. More work, more planning, more preparation. But deep down, you knew you weren't moving forward. You were staying in control. And control can look like progress. Until you realize nothing is actually changing. That's where the quiet frustration comes from. Not from failure, but from misalignment. Because there's a version of you that sees differently, that thinks differently, that doesn't hesitate the same way. And every time you ignore that version, something inside you tightens. You feel it when you compare yourself to others, not out of jealousy, but out of recognition. You feel it when time passes faster than you expected, and the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be gets harder to ignore. You feel it when you realize that effort alone has not been enough. And maybe the hardest part is that no one sees this. From the outside, you look responsible, stable, doing what you're supposed to do. But inside, there's a quiet tension between what you're living and what you know is possible. And that tension creates something most people carry silently, a low-level fear, not of losing everything, but of staying the same, years passing, patterns repeating, potential slowly fading into routine. That fear doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes it shows up as distraction, as busyness, as constantly filling your time so you don't have to sit with the question, what if I never break out of this? And right next to that fear, there's something else, regret. Not for what you did, for what you didn't, for the version of yourself that you postponed. for the decisions you knew mattered but treated like they could wait. And maybe they could, for a while. But over time, waiting becomes a pattern, and patterns become identity, and identity quietly shapes your future. That's why this moment matters more than it seems. Because this isn't just about money. It's about whether you're willing to see yourself clearly enough to admit that the way you've been operating has not been random. It's been consistent, and anything consistent can be changed, but only after you stop pretending it's not there. And this is the moment where everything rearranges, without you forcing it, because now you can see it, not as theory, not as motivation, as pattern, the same way of thinking, creating the same type of decisions, producing the same kind of life. And suddenly, it's clear why nothing outside ever felt enough, because you were trying to change results. Without changing the starting point, you were adjusting actions inside a mindset that was already limiting the outcome. That's why Solomon didn't begin with money. He began with thought, because if you think like someone who survives, you will organize your entire life around protection. You will protect your time, protect your income, protect your comfort, and without realizing it, you will also protect your limitations. But if you think like someone who builds, everything flips. You stop asking, how do I avoid losing this? And you start asking, how do I multiply this? You stop organizing your life around stability and start structuring it around growth, not recklessly, but intentionally. And this is where Jesus' words stop being abstract and become unavoidably practical. Seek first, not second, not when you have time, not after everything feels secure. First, because whatever comes first organizes everything that follows. If survival comes first, everything else will serve survival. If comfort comes first, everything else will protect comfort. But if alignment comes first, if structure comes first, if the right way of thinking comes first, then everything else begins to reposition itself around that. Not instantly, but inevitably. And this is the part most people miss. You don't break the cycle by doing more. You break it by thinking differently before you act. Because the moment that shift happens, you start seeing things you couldn't see before. Opportunities don't look risky. They look strategic. Decisions don't feel scary. They feel necessary. Money doesn't feel like something to hold. It feels like something to direct. And once you see that, you can't go back to thinking the old way. You can't unsee the pattern. You can't pretend that repeating the same structure will somehow create a different outcome. Because now you understand something most people never fully grasp. Your financial life is not a reflection of how hard you work. It's a reflection of how you think *** before *** you work. And that means one thing. If the thinking changes, the entire trajectory changes with it. Not by force, but by design. And from this point on, every decision you make carries a different weight, because now you know. You're not just choosing actions. You're choosing the structure that will define everything that comes after.